Hello, this is Chris Wilhelm, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the Friday, April 10th issue of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Fed's inflation woes preceded the war with Iran. An energy shock stemming from the fighting has added a layer of complexity to the Federal Reserve's decision-making around interest rates. By Colby Smith. Early on in the war with Iran, Jerome H. Powell, the chair of the Federal Reserve, seemed vexed about the state of inflation after the central bank's prolonged battle to try to tame it. Overall consumer price growth, based on the Fed's preferred gauge, had in the past year made little progress toward its 2% target. Another closely watched metric, tracking inflation in services such as transportation and personal care, had also barely budged, sitting well above its 20-year average of 2.7%. It's frustrating, Mr. Powell told reporters at a news conference last month. The Fed, which had been wrestling with elevated price pressures for 5 years, needed to see progress on a multitude of fronts to feel confident about its grip on inflation, he said. Mr. Powell warned that without that, additional interest rate cuts would be hard to justify. That backdrop adds a layer of complexity to the Fed's decision-making on rates as it stares down an energy shock stemming from the war in the Middle East. Officials maintain that there is no urgency to move rates from their range of 3.5% to 3.75%, especially given heightened uncertainty around the war's resolution with a shaky ceasefire in place. But the longer the Fed misses on its inflation target, the more intense the pressure will be to address it. If a policymaker comes and tells you a story every 6 months about why they didn't achieve the inflation goal, I think they start to lose credibility with the public, says James Bullard, Dean of Purdue's Business School and former president of the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. Economists typically expect energy-related shocks to have a short-lived economic impact that fades as prices retreat. A rule of thumb is that a 10% increase in oil prices will raise the personal consumption expenditures price index, the Fed's preferred gauge of inflation, by 0.2 percentage points. What's known as core inflation, which strips out volatile food and energy prices, will increase by 0.04 percentage points. Monthly inflation data released on Thursday showed that before the war, overall PCE inflation rose 0.4% and maintained a 2.8% annual clip. Core inflation registered a 3% pace after another 0.4% increase in February. In the weeks since that February survey period, oil prices have shot higher. Until Tuesday's ceasefire, Brent crude, the international benchmark, had gained roughly 50% since the start of the war. It traded around $95 a barrel on Wednesday, still roughly 35% higher than its pre-war level. Gasoline costs have surged higher as a result, with Americans paying roughly 40% more to fill up their cars than before the war. Shipping costs have also risen, as have jet fuel prices, raising the prospect of higher airfares, as Delta Airlines warned on Wednesday. The disruptions in the natural gas market have contributed to a global fertilizer shortage that, if sustained, could make groceries costlier. The impact of these increases on inflation is expected to be immediate, showing up as early as March's data. An extended period of higher energy prices risks compelling companies in other sectors, especially those that have already seen their profit margins eroded as they weathered President Trump's tariffs, to consider their own cost adjustments. Prices paid by businesses across the services sector for materials and other inputs increased much more in March than they had in roughly 13 years, a nascent sign of inflationary pressures stemming from the war. Input prices also surged for manufacturing companies, notching the highest level since the peak of the pandemic inflation surge in June 2022. For the most part, Fed officials do not expect energy-related price pressures to significantly alter the outlook for underlying inflation. John C. Williams, president of the New York Fed, said on Tuesday that the story hasn't changed very much. But policymakers know they cannot afford to dismiss the threat of a more pernicious problem, underscoring their tenuous position after missing their inflation target for so long. Economists point to two major drivers for the stubborn inflation. The first revolves around an assessment of just how restrictive rates are, meaning how much borrowing costs are weighing on economic activity. Last month, Mr. Powell described the Fed's current policy settings after rate cuts in 2024 and 25 as somewhere around the borderline between restrictive and not. But the economy's resilience throughout the litany of policy changes in the past year, from tariffs to immigration restrictions, has raised questions about what constitutes a neutral rate that neither speeds up growth nor slows it down. As of projections released last month, most Fed officials place it around 3.1%. If the neutral rate is higher than that, however, current policy settings may not be doing much to keep a lid on inflation. By cutting rates 1.75 percentage points over the last 2 years, the Fed contributed to a policy that was not particularly restrictive and therefore allowed inflation to grow, said Mark Giannone, chief U.S. economist at Barclays. He added that the Fed might have been in a slightly better position had it not reduced rates by as much. How much policymakers should be restraining the economy depends in large part on the public's perception about future inflation. The Fed wants to ensure that people do not lose faith in its ability to get inflation back down to 2% over time. If they do, and expectations about inflation over a longer horizon shift higher, that can make it significantly harder for the central bank to reach its goal. Some economists point to these expectations as another reason inflation has stayed high. The Fed pays closest attention to measures of financial activity that track expectations beyond 1 year. Short-term measures, especially those based on surveys, tend to be highly volatile. 3, 5, or 10-year metrics are instead favored. Anna L. Paulson, president of the Philadelphia Fed, recently described long-term inflation expectations as a little more fragile, even as they remained consistent with 2%. Short-term measures, meanwhile, have shot higher, leading Michael S. Barr, a Fed governor, to call for the central bank to be especially vigilant. Disagreement among survey respondents about expected inflation is still relatively elevated, according to data from Ricardo Reis, an economist at the London School of Economics. Companies also seem to be resetting prices more frequently, Fed research shows. Taking those developments together, Mr. Reis said, the energy shock comes at a critical time to test whether expectations are anchored. Yuri Gorodnichenko, an economist at the University of California, Berkeley, said the Fed's rate decisions in the coming months would determine the outcome of this test. If the Fed holds rates steady and price pressures build, the real inflation-adjusted rate will fall, passively loosening the policy settings. No Fed official has so far called for a rate increase, but a growing cohort now appears open to the idea of one if inflation stays too elevated for too long, minutes from the central bank's March meeting showed. The question is not how households and firms could expect inflation of 4 to 5% over the next several years, Olivier Koibian, an economist at the University of Texas, Austin, wrote recently with Mr. Gorodnichenko. Given what they have experienced, what they are observing in energy markets, and what they are hearing from the Fed, the more pointed question is, how could they expect anything else? FBI arrests ex-Army employee who detailed harassment to journalist. Courtney Williams, who worked at Fort Bragg in North Carolina, was accused of leaking classified information to a reporter, by Jonathan Wolfe. A former U.S. Army employee was charged on Wednesday with leaking classified information to a journalist who published some of her disclosures in a book and article, federal prosecutors said. The employee, Courtney Williams, 40, worked in a support role for the Special Operations Unit Delta Force at Fort Bragg in North Carolina from 2010 to 2016, the Justice Department said. In a book and article published by a journalist last year, she described experiencing sexual harassment and gender discrimination during her time there. The FBI arrested her on Tuesday, and she was indicted by a grand jury the following day on a charge of alleged transmission of classified national defense information to a journalist, the department said in a statement. She faces a punishment of up to 10 years in prison. Ms. Williams held top-secret security clearance while working for the Army, according to a criminal complaint filed in U.S. District Court. Between 2022 and 2025, after she had left the Army, she communicated with a journalist who published an article and book that included experiences from her time working with the military, including classified information, according to prosecutors who did not name the journalist. Ms. Williams was featured prominently in a Politico magazine article by Seth Harp, published last August, that detailed alleged misconduct in Delta Force. The article was adapted from Mr. Harp's book, The Fort Bragg Cartel, which was published the same month and examined unsolved murders and other problems at the military base. The criminal complaint details phone calls and text messages that Ms. Williams exchanged with the journalist and states that she revealed classified national defense information. She also mailed documents, photographs, notes, and other materials to the journalist that likely contained classified information on a thumb drive, the complaint said. In the article, Ms. Williams was quoted as speaking about sexual harassment and gender discrimination in the unit, describing some of her time there as a living hell. In one instance, she said she was asked to undergo a dress code check and was told to turn around and bend over in front of senior officers to assess whether her underwear could be seen through the fabric. The article quoted a Pentagon spokesman, Sean Parnell, as saying that the Defense Department had a zero-tolerance policy for any kind of harassment. In announcing the charges against Ms. Williams, federal officials described her behavior as putting the United States and its soldiers at risk and suggested that she revealed tradecraft, tactics, and techniques used by Delta Force without providing further details. The FBI director, Kash Patel, congratulated his colleagues on the arrest of Ms. Williams in a social media post on Wednesday. "Let this serve as a message to any would-be leakers. We're working these cases and we're making arrests," he wrote. "This FBI will not tolerate those who seek to betray our country and put Americans in harm's way." Mr. Harp, the journalist, strongly condemned the charges in a statement on social media. He called Ms. Williams a courageous whistleblower who helped expose rampant gender discrimination and sexual harassment in Delta Force. He accused the Justice Department of prosecuting Ms. Williams to retaliate against her for her critical comments about the unit, adding that officials had not detailed what specific classified national defense information she had leaked. After the article was published in August, Ms. Williams exchanged more messages with the journalist, according to the criminal complaint, and expressed concern about the disclosure of classified information in the piece. "I wish you had sent me a copy of what was to be published prior to publishing," she wrote, according to the complaint. "Other than a few factual errors, I would definitely have been concerned with the amount of classified information being disclosed." In a message to another unnamed person, federal prosecutors said Ms. Williams said that she was probably going to jail for life. She also seemed very uneasy about the potential fallout. "I'm taking deep breaths, but have a feeling this is going to be more of a nightmare for my children than not," she wrote. A federal public defender was appointed to represent Ms. Williams, according to court documents, which did not include a lawyer's name. The Justice Department and Mr. Harp did not immediately respond to requests for comment early Thursday. Ms. Williams was being detained until a preliminary hearing that was set for April 13th, according to court documents. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Top CDC official delays report on COVID shots effectiveness. Dr. Jay Bhattacharya objected to the study's methodology, saying it gave an inaccurate picture of the vaccine's benefits. By Apurva Mandavili. The acting head of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention delayed the publication of a research report showing that the COVID vaccine significantly reduced the likelihood of hospitalizations and emergency visits last winter. When Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, the agency's acting director at the time, reviewed the report last month, he objected to the methodology used in the study, saying it yielded an inaccurate picture of the vaccine's effectiveness, according to an administration official who spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss internal matters. Dr. Bhattacharya delayed the report, inviting controversy even as the White House has indicated that it wants to tamp down discussions of vaccines before the midterms. In other meetings with CDC staff, he has praised vaccines, and the one for measles in particular, offering to publicly endorse immunizations. Dr. Bhattacharya did not immediately respond to a request for comment. The COVID vaccine report was scheduled to be published on March 19th in the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report, the CDC's flagship journal. Dr. Bhattacharya's delaying the study's release was first reported by the Washington Post. Dr. Bhattacharya, who is the director of the National Institutes of Health, had also been serving as the CDC's acting director, but his appointment ended last month when the Trump administration failed to name a new candidate for permanent director of the agency before the acting directorship expired. The administration has granted him broad powers to oversee the CDC's activities. Dr. Deborah Houry, who served as the CDC's chief medical officer before she resigned in August, said a political appointee at CDC would be very rarely involved in a review or decision regarding MMWR, referring to the journal. Previously, this would have been reviewed by a career scientist who worked across administrations, like the chief medical officer, Dr. Houry said. Given staffing shortages at the agency, continuing health threats like measles, and Dr. Bhattacharya's duties as director of another agency, this would be even more unusual to do, she added. But Andrew Nixon, a spokesman for the Department of Health and Human Services, said in an emailed statement, it's routine for CDC leadership to review and flag concerns about MMWR papers, especially relating to their methodology, leading up to planned publication. Dr. Bhattacharya expressed concerns about the observational method used in this study to calculate vaccine effectiveness, and the scientific team is working to address those concerns, Mr. Nixon added. Dr. Bhattacharya wants to make sure that the paper uses the most appropriate methodology for such a study. The study calculated the COVID shot's effectiveness by looking at the vaccination status of people who had sought care at hospitals and emergency rooms. It found that vaccination cut the likelihood of emergency visits because of COVID by 50% and of hospitalizations by 55%, according to a summary of the study viewed by the New York Times. This type of study is routinely used to assess vaccine effectiveness and was also used in a study of the flu vaccine published last month. Dr. Bhattacharya had not assumed his acting director role in time to vet the flu paper, but would have raised the concern over that study's methodology if he had, according to a health department official, speaking on the condition of anonymity to discuss internal agency matters. Dr. Bhattacharya insisted that the COVID vaccine instead be assessed in randomized clinical trials. In such trials, some participants would get the shot and others would receive a placebo, and scientists would then see what proportion of each group got sick. But such trials tend to be prohibitively expensive and cannot produce answers when the virus is not circulating at high levels, so they tend not to offer results in time to be useful. Last week, Pfizer and BioNTech halted a trial of their updated COVID shot after struggling to enroll enough participants. Climate change denial sees a resurgence in Trump's Washington. A conference near the White House drew hundreds of people who reject the scientific consensus on climate change. The mood was triumphant. By Maxine Joslow. Climate change is a hoax perpetrated by leftist politicians. Fossil fuels are the greenest energy sources. More carbon dioxide in the atmosphere will be harmless. These were some of the false claims made at a conference on Wednesday held by groups that reject the overwhelming scientific consensus on climate change. What might have seemed like a fringe event in years past this time boasted a prominent keynote speaker, Lee Zeldin, the administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency and one of President Trump's possible choices for the next Attorney General. We aren't just following blind obedience to whatever the dire doom and gloom prediction of the day is, Mr. Zeldin said at the conference, which drew around 220 attendees to the basement ballroom of a hotel in downtown Washington. We won't sign up for the script that the world is imminently about to end, Mr. Zeldin added, drawing applause from the crowd, which had given him a standing ovation before his speech. The event made clear that climate change deniers are experiencing a triumphant resurgence in Mr. Trump's Washington after years of feeling sidelined by the scientific and political establishments. A vast majority of scientists agree that climate change is real and that it is caused by burning fossil fuels like oil, gas, and coal. They expect average global temperatures to rise 1.5 degrees Celsius, 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit, above pre-industrial levels within the next decade, unleashing dire impacts that include more deadly heat waves, coastal floods, water shortages, and crop failures. Mr. Trump, however, has derided the scientific consensus on global warming as the greatest con job ever perpetrated on the world. And Mr. Zeldin has said that the EPA is driving a dagger straight into the heart of the climate change religion by rolling back dozens of regulations that burdened the fossil fuel industry. The conference on Wednesday brought together people with varying levels of skepticism of scientific consensus. Some attendees flatly denied that the planet was warming, while others recognized the trend but argued that it was not an emergency and that potential solutions were too costly. The event was organized by the Heartland Institute, a research organization that says it promotes free market solutions and that has attacked mainstream climate science for decades. Other sponsors included the CO2 Coalition, a nonprofit group that claims falsely that planet-warming carbon dioxide is beneficial to humans. The influence of both groups waned under the Biden administration, which embraced the science behind climate change and pushed policies designed to address it. Mr. Zeldin's appearance at the conference underscored how the group's sway has grown in the Trump era. Last month, the CO2 Coalition successfully nominated an eye doctor with no background in air pollution science to a committee that advises the EPA on the latest air pollution research. On Wednesday, the group gave out tote bags, pamphlets, mints, and blue and green stress balls that resembled miniature Earths to conference attendees. The white lettering on the stress balls read, "Don't stress, there is no climate crisis." Next to the CO2 Coalition's booth, a chemist and businessman from Wisconsin, Stephen Einhorn, was distributing copies of his own pamphlet, whose cover promised to reveal what the climate activists don't know or don't want you to know. "I'm very happy that Trump appointed Zeldin," Mr. Einhorn said in an interview. "I'm surprised at how much progress he's made toward informing the American people what the actual science is, which is that we have a wonderful climate. We're blessed. There's nothing to worry about." The Heartland Institute does not disclose its funders. In the past, it has received financial support from oil and gas interests, as well as the Mercer Family Foundation, an influential donor to conservative causes. Because we're not as well funded by industry as people think, we don't have a fancy green room, James M. Taylor, the president of the Heartland Institute, said in an interview outside the main ballroom. The group receives around $4 million each year from foundations and individuals, Mr. Taylor said. If the Heartland Institute had recently received funding from the fossil fuel industry, he added, he wasn't aware of it. Pausing to reflect, Mr. Taylor said the second Trump administration has done more for the climate change denial movement than any other administration in history. He pointed to the EPA's extraordinary move in February to renounce the federal government's legal authority to combat climate change. "This is absolutely a moment of triumph," Mr. Taylor said, adding, "It's nice to be winning." In addition to Mr. Zeldin, the speakers at the conference included West Virginia Governor Patrick Morrisey, a Republican who has built a career opposing federal climate regulations. "I'm very hopeful that we're going to keep the White House for a number of terms, but let's take advantage of where we are now," Mr. Morrisey said. William Harper, a professor emeritus of physics at Princeton University, who has argued that global warming is good for humanity, delivered the lunchtime address. He dismissed concerns about rising carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere over a relatively carbon-intensive lunch of roasted chicken breast, cannellini bean ragu, and ricotta cheesecake. EDF Action, the political arm of the Environmental Defense Fund, put up posters outside the conference that protested the event and highlighted the effects of climate change nationwide. "Climate denial won't lower insurance costs," one poster read, referring to high home insurance premiums in areas prone to wildfires, hurricanes, and other disasters fueled by rising global temperatures. The conference was set to continue on Thursday with a speech by John Clauser, a Nobel Physics laureate who has claimed falsely that clouds have a net cooling effect on the planet. Israel says it will talk with Lebanon, but gives no sign of a ceasefire there. Europeans and Iran warned that the Israeli offensive against Hezbollah threatened the truce in the U.S.-Israeli war against Iran. By Aaron Boxerman, Amelia Nierenberg, Christina Goldbaum, and Michael Levinson. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel said on Thursday that he had ordered his government to start direct negotiations with Lebanon on disarming Hezbollah, on a day when President Trump urged restraint by Israel and European leaders warned that Israeli attacks in Lebanon threatened to unravel the fragile ceasefire in the war with Iran. But in a statement to Israelis shortly after he made the announcement, Mr. Netanyahu declared that there is no ceasefire in Lebanon and that Israel was continuing to strike Hezbollah with force and will not stop until we restore your security. The Israeli military issued new evacuation warnings for the southern outskirts of Beirut, the Lebanese capital, which were among the densely populated areas pummeled by heavy Israeli airstrikes on Wednesday. Lebanon's health ministry said more than 300 people had been killed and more than 1,000 others wounded in those attacks, making it the deadliest day since the latest war between Israel and Hezbollah began last month. On Thursday night, Israel said it had launched new strikes on Lebanon, and Hezbollah said it had fired rockets into northern Israel. The United States and Israel have said the 2-week ceasefire with Iran, which was announced on Tuesday, does not extend to Lebanon, contradicting both Pakistan, which helped broker the truce, and Iran. Iran has suggested it could pull out of the deal if Israeli attacks in Lebanon continue, even as Iranian leaders and Trump administration officials prepare for talks this weekend in Pakistan aimed at achieving a long-term peace agreement. European leaders argued pointedly on Thursday that Israel's attacks in Lebanon were undermining the ceasefire and that Lebanon must be protected under the 2-week truce. The severity with which Israel is waging war there could cause the peace process as a whole to fail, Chancellor Friedrich Merz of Germany, one of Israel's closest European allies, told reporters in Berlin. Jean-Noël Barrot, France's foreign minister, said that Lebanon should not be the scapegoat for an Israeli government that is frustrated because a ceasefire has been reached between the United States and Iran. Kaja Kallas, the top European Union diplomat, said Israel's strikes in Lebanon had put the ceasefire under severe strain, and Prime Minister Keir Starmer of Britain said during a visit to Bahrain that Israel's attacks on Lebanon should stop. Mr. Trump told NBC News on Thursday that the Israelis were scaling back operations in Lebanon, but stopped short of calling on Mr. Netanyahu to end the military assault. I spoke with Bibi, and he's going to low-key it, Mr. Trump said, referring to Mr. Netanyahu by his nickname. I think we have to be sort of a little more low-key. Hezbollah, both an Iranian-backed armed militia and a powerful political force in Lebanon, started firing rockets and drones into Israel on March 2nd in retaliation for an Israeli strike in Tehran that killed Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, Israel's supreme leader. Since then, Israel has carried out intense airstrikes in Lebanon and has moved troops into southern Lebanon in what it calls a campaign to eliminate the threat from Hezbollah. It is the latest of several Israeli invasions with that aim, most recently in 2024, across more than 4 decades of conflict between them. In a statement on Thursday, Mr. Netanyahu's office said that he had instructed the Israeli cabinet to start talks with Lebanon at the earliest possible time. Those negotiations, the statement said, would focus not only on disarming Hezbollah, but on arranging peaceful ties between Israel and Lebanon. The U.S. State Department said it would host talks between representatives of Israel and Lebanon next week. Joseph Aoun, Lebanon's president, has repeatedly called for direct negotiations with Israel to end the Israeli assault in his country. Until Thursday, Israeli officials had largely dismissed his entreaties. Israeli officials have given no indication so far that such negotiations would lead them to stop their attacks in Lebanon, where they have signaled plans for a longer occupation of the country's south. And it is far from clear whether the talks have buy-in from Hezbollah, which has long overshadowed the official Lebanese government. While Lebanese leaders have voiced interest in disarming Hezbollah, Israel and many Lebanese have expressed intense skepticism that Lebanon's weak government is willing or able to do so. On Thursday, hundreds of people in Lebanon packed the roads to northern areas of Beirut after the Israeli military issued the evacuation warnings for the southern outskirts of the city, signaling that strikes could be imminent. Lebanon also began a period of mourning for those killed in the Israeli attacks on Wednesday, when the Israeli military said it had targeted more than 100 Hezbollah command centers and military sites in the span of 10 minutes. Search and rescue teams on Thursday were still combing through apartment buildings in Beirut that had been flattened, with dozens of people missing. Signs of destruction were everywhere. Mangled cars, blown-out storefronts, and dust-covered streets littered with piles of gnarled rebar and broken concrete. The ceasefire did appear to bring some measure of calm to parts of the Persian Gulf on Thursday. The United Arab Emirates said its skies were clear of aerial threats, and there were no reports from several other countries in the region of incoming fire after they spent weeks fending off Iranian missiles and drones. But after a day of relative quiet, Kuwait's army said it was fending off hostile attacks from drones which penetrated the country's airspace, targeting a number of vital facilities. The army did not specify the source of the drones. Marine traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, the vital waterway off Iran, through which a fifth of the world's crude oil must pass, remained a trickle. Iran had promised to reopen the strait during the 2-week ceasefire, but on Wednesday, the number of ships transiting the waterway was the lowest since late March, according to Kepler, a global tracking firm. Saeed Khatibzadeh, Iran's deputy foreign minister, told Britain's ITV News in an interview published on Thursday that the strait was open, but that ships wishing to pass through must coordinate with Iranian authorities because of technical restrictions, including mines. "We have to be very careful for the security and safety of tankers and vessels," he said. Sultan Ahmed Al Jaber, chief executive of Abu Dhabi's state oil company, said on Thursday that for global energy markets to stabilize, more must be done to reopen the strait. "Let's be clear, the Strait of Hormuz is not open," he wrote on LinkedIn. "Access is being restricted, conditioned, and controlled." You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. In Germany's east, the far right could soon take power. This is its plan. In the eastern state of Saxony-Anhalt, the Alternative for Germany could win control of the government this fall. Once in power, it has a plan to overhaul German society. By Jim Tankersley and Christopher F. Schütze. Since the end of World War II, no far-right political party has held power in a German state or federal government. That could change this fall in a small pocket of eastern Germany, as economic stagnation and voter backlash toward mass migration batter the centrist political establishment. Polls show the Alternative for Germany Party, or AfD, could win an outright majority of seats in September in the state of Saxony-Anhalt, near Berlin. The party's agenda, if put in place, would give the country its first look at what the AfD, the second largest federal party today, hopes could ultimately be a cultural and demographic overhaul of German life. Leaders of the party laid out their goals for the state in interviews and a 156-page platform. They appear partly unworkable, far exceeding the power of a state government. The more attainable elements amount to a vision for turning Saxony-Anhalt, a relatively small state, into a magnet for large German-born socially conservative families and a hostile environment for many immigrants. Under their proposals, refugees would be deported or moved into group homes, large families would get tax breaks, childcare, already heavily subsidized by the government, would be free, public broadcasters would lose funding, schools would ban gay pride flags, they would also teach more Russian. I want to give the citizens in Saxony-Anhalt their good old secure Germany back, Ulrich Siegmund, the AfD's candidate to govern the state and a TikTok star, told us in an interview. We met in the scenic, centuries-old heart of Tangermünde, a town on the Elbe River popular with bicycle tourists. It will be a very beautiful country with a very good spirit of optimism, he added, certainly for the children, for the families. To its critics, the policy platform exacerbates long-running concerns about the party, which German intelligence has formally investigated for extremism, and those leaders have variously belittled the Holocaust, revived Nazi slogans, and maligned foreigners. Eva von Angern, a state lawmaker from the far-left party Die Linke, called the AfD's plans a violation of human rights and unconstitutional, and predicted the party would fall short of a winning majority. They repeatedly demonstrate who, in their view, doesn't belong in Saxony-Anhalt, Ms. von Angern said, including people of different skin color, people with a migrant background, and LGBTQ+ people. Saxony-Anhalt, with about 2.2 million people in a country of more than 83 million, may seem an unlikely place to root a political overhaul centered on expelling immigrants and nurturing young families. It has the oldest population of any state and one of the country's smallest concentrations of migrants, according to German census numbers. About 1 of every 13 residents has an immigration background, compared with 2 of every 5 in Berlin. But Saxony-Anhalt combines several of the factors that have helped fuel the AfD's rise. It lies in the former communist East, where residents are less wedded to mainstream parties that were founded in the West and more open to anti-establishment messages. It is also one of Germany's poorest states. The unemployment rate there last year was 8.3%, 2 percentage points above the national average. For those reasons, the politics of migration is a very strong factor, despite the low visibility of migrants there, said Marcel Lewandowski, a political scientist at Martin Luther University, Halle-Wittenberg, in Halle, the state's second-largest city. In its section about migration, the AfD's governing platform for Saxony-Anhalt contains 43 points. Some, like ending the right to asylum and barring some immigrants from settling in the state, appear to violate federal law and could prove impossible for a state government to enact. Others are more achievable, though contentious. They include converting a government welcome center for migrants into a deportation detention facility and segregating the children of asylum seekers into refugee-only schools. We met a lead author of the platform, Hans Thomas Tilschneider, at the state capitol building in Magdeburg. He had a graying red beard, large round glasses, a maroon turtleneck, and tan slacks. He showed off his red MAGA mug. Mr. Tilschneider is an immigrant himself, born in Romania to ethnic Germans. His parents fled that country's dictatorship when he was young, and Mr. Tilschneider grew up in southwest Germany. Vacationing in the Middle East as a child, he told us, he grew fascinated with the sound of the Quran. At university, he studied Islam. Today, he said, Saxony-Anhalt's largest problems start with migrants who are slated for deportation but remain in the state. He said the party would not deport anyone who was in the country legally. We want a new government here. We don't want a revolution, he said. But, he said, the party does want major changes in a wide range of other areas, like a removal of gay pride displays from schools, a moratorium on new wind turbines, and a rollback of other green policies. It also wants to normalize German relations with Russia after years of hostilities related to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It calls for an end to sanctions on Moscow, another federal issue, not a state one, and more Russian language instruction in schools. Mr. Tilschneider, who attended a birthday celebration for President Vladimir Putin of Russia at the Russian embassy in Berlin last year, called the Russian language and literature pillars of European culture. While Biden still ruled the USA, I was very pro-Russian, he told us, because then Russia was, so to speak, the only partner of values. Now, he added, I am also a big friend of Trump. He is one of a few AfD members named by German intelligence in a report that was the center of its investigation into the party for extremism. The report, currently under judicial review, criticized Mr. Tilschneider for accusing all mainstream parties of helping plunder Germany. In our interview, Mr. Tilschneider said the intelligence agency was becoming more and more like the Stasi, the former secret police of East Germany. If Mr. Tilschneider is a policy brain behind the AfD's plans, Mr. Siegmund, the candidate for governor, is its smiling face. His social media posts are relentlessly upbeat, whether he is explaining policy, hanging out with school children, or organizing a park cleanup. He has more than 600,000 followers on TikTok and says he will use social media prolifically once he is in government, explaining challenges and even admitting mistakes. Mr. Siegmund met us at a bakery in Tangermünde. He talked about improving hospital care and schools and reversing economic decline. He was eager to emphasize the AfD's plans to encourage native-born Germans in traditional families, with a mother and father, to have more children. I want to think long-term across generations, he said. Ms. van Angern said that focus threatened to make life harder for working mothers. For the AfD, women are supposed to support men and ideally focus solely on children in the household, she said. AfD party leaders acknowledge that Germany needs workers and that it will need even more if the party's deportation agenda is successful. So they want to offer large financial incentives for German families to grow. A 3-child family, for example, would receive roughly $9,200 stipend. We asked if there was room in that future Saxony-Anhalt for new migrants. It depends on the migrants, Mr. Siegmund said, whether they want to behave themselves and whether they want to make a contribution. We left the bakery and walked through town. Nearly everyone waved or smiled at Mr. Siegmund as he passed. We came to a large church with a chimney where a bird had built a large nest. He asked if America had those. The bird stood up on long legs. It was a stork. North Korea tests new weapons, drawing lessons from Iran war. The country has been leveraging armed conflicts abroad, such as Russia's war against Ukraine, to bolster its own military capabilities. By Cho Sang-hun. North Korea conducted a series of weapons tests this week that suggest the country is seeking to draw lessons from the war in the Middle East to sharpen its military deterrence against the United States and South Korea. The North Korean military said on Thursday that among the weapons tested were missiles carrying cluster munition and graphite bomb payloads, much like weapons that have appeared in the Middle East. Iran launched missiles with cluster munition warheads at Israel, and a widespread blackout in Tehran last month led to online speculation that graphite bombs may have been used. The Pentagon has not commented. That North Korea is testing similar weapons signals that the country is trying to learn from the Mideast war, such as it has from Russia's war against Ukraine, and that it is incorporating those lessons into its own war plans, military experts said. In tests conducted from Monday through Wednesday, the official North Korean news agency said North Korea's military demonstrated several advancements in its arsenal. South Korean officials confirmed that North Korea carried out multiple weapons tests this week. A short-range ballistic missile known as Hwasong-11A, or KN-23, was used to test a cluster bomb warhead and destroy an area equivalent to 10 football fields, the North Korean state media said. A cluster warhead disperses dozens of small bombs across a wide area, inflicting far greater damage than a conventional single explosive payload. North Korea also tested carbon fiber graphite bombs, also known as blackout bombs, which are designed to disable an enemy's electrical grid by setting off extensive short circuits. As part of its continuing effort to strengthen air defenses against the superior air power of U.S. and South Korean forces, the country tested a mobile, short-range anti-aircraft missile system. It also tested the maximum thrust of a new missile engine built with low-cost materials, state media said, reflecting its drive to offset its disadvantages against the United States and South Korea through sheer volume of missiles and rockets. Several short-range ballistic missiles fired during the tests flew between 150 and 434 miles off the east coast of North Korea, South Korean officials said. Seoul did not specify which weapons were involved, but its Presidential National Security Office convened a meeting with top defense officials on Wednesday to assess the implications for South Korean security. North Korea has been watching the wars in Ukraine and the Middle East and incorporating key weapon systems used there into its own ability to deter and fight war, said Hong Min, an expert on the North Korean military at the Korea Institute for National Unification, a government-funded think tank in Seoul. North Korea has benefited before from armed conflicts abroad. It has supplied both weapons and soldiers to Russia in support of its war against Ukraine, receiving economic assistance and weapons technology in return, according to South Korean officials and analysts. Last month, North Korea unveiled new tanks equipped with systems to intercept anti-tank missiles and drones, technology South Korean experts suspect came from Russia. The war in Ukraine, the U.S. Director of National Intelligence noted in an annual threat assessment in March, will continue to have spillover effects in other parts of the globe, as shown with North Korean troops gaining valuable warfighting experience and military technology from Russia. North Korea's leader, Kim Jong-un, has suspended virtually all diplomacy with Seoul and Washington since the collapse of his nuclear talks with President Trump in 2019. Since then, he has pursued closer ties with Russia and China and doubled down on expanding his military prowess. He traveled to Beijing in September to attend a military parade alongside Xi Jinping, China's leader, and President Vladimir V. Putin of Russia. China's Foreign Minister, Wang Yi, arrived in Pyongyang on Thursday for a 2-day visit. South Korea's latest round of weapons tests serves multiple purposes, said Yang Mu-jin, former president of the Seoul-based University of North Korean Studies. They accelerate a 5-year program that Mr. Kim enacted to build up his North Korea's defenses and deepen his country's hostility toward South Korea. Mr. Kim has long sought to use the threat of instability on the Korean peninsula as diplomatic leverage against Washington. Under the 5-year plan, which was adopted at a Workers' Party Congress in February, North Korea called for the mass production and deployment of short-range ballistic missiles to greatly increase the density and durability of concentrated attack against South Korea, which it designated as its most hostile enemy state. In a statement on Tuesday, Jang Kum-chol, first vice minister of North Korea's foreign ministry, called South Korea's leaders world-startling fools for expecting any improvement in inter-Korean relations. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. 3 Russian submarines detected near Britain were spying, UK says. John Healey, the defense secretary, said the vessels were gathering information about undersea pipelines and said he believed President Vladimir V. Putin would want us to be distracted by the Middle East. By Michael D. Shear. The British military spent more than a month tracking Russian efforts to spy on critical undersea pipelines and telecommunication lines on the floor of the northern Atlantic Ocean, Defense Secretary John Healey revealed on Thursday. Mr. Healey displayed photographs of Russian vessels that he said were part of a covert operation to gather information about the underwater infrastructure. He said the British military response, in cooperation with Norway and other allies, exposed attempts at information gathering by Russia's president, Vladimir V. Putin. Our armed forces left them in no doubt that they were being monitored, that their movements were not covert, as President Putin planned, Mr. Healey told reporters. I'm making the statement to call out this Russian activity. And to President Putin, I say we see you. We see your activity over our cables and our pipelines. He said there was no evidence that the Russian submarines did anything but gather information about the cables and pipelines, and that the British military did not engage them. But he said the message to Russia was that any attempt to damage them will not be tolerated and will have serious consequences. The British military has been criticized by opposition political leaders and by President Trump for not dedicating more of its resources to the Middle East during the American and Israeli-led war against Iran. Mr. Healey said he was revealing the military operation in the Atlantic partly as a response to that criticism. I understand people questioning why all UK military assets and personnel have not been deployed to deal with it, but that is not in Britain's national interest, he said. The greatest threats are often unseen and silent. The Kremlin spokesman, Dmitry S. Peskov, did not immediately respond to a request for comment on Mr. Healey's allegations. Officials across Europe have cited Russian espionage and military operations in the northern Atlantic as a key threat to the continent and to NATO. Mr. Trump claimed last year that his repeated demands for control of Greenland were due to a fear that NATO's European members were not doing enough to stop Mr. Putin's activities there, although experts pointed out that the United States already has sweeping military access to Greenland. Mr. Trump, angry at Prime Minister Keir Starmer of Britain for his refusal to join the initial U.S.-Israeli strikes against Iran, has taken particular aim at the British military in recent weeks, calling its warships toys and saying that they are old and decrepit. Mr. Healey said on Thursday that the military's ability to monitor the Russian submarines 24/7 was evidence that Mr. Trump was wrong. I reject the descriptions that have been leveled against them, he said. Our operation that I'm setting out today reinforces the seriousness with which we take the Russian threat. Mr. Healey also said that he believes Mr. Putin was taking advantage of the conflict in the Middle East by timing his North Atlantic spying at a time that he thought his adversaries would be distracted. Putin would want us to be distracted by the Middle East, Mr. Healey said. We are not just exposing his covert operation, but we are saying to him that we recognize Russia as the primary threat to the UK and to NATO, and that we will not take our eyes off Putin. The defense secretary declined to say exactly where the Russian submarines were discovered or what cables or pipelines they were spying on. 2 of the submarines were part of Russia's main directorate of deep-sea research, Mr. Healey said. A 3rd vessel was a Russian attack submarine that the British military concluded was meant to distract from the activities of the other 2. Mr. Healey said the Russian operation was aimed at gathering information during peacetime on the network of cables and pipelines that crisscross the world's oceans so that Russia would be able to rapidly damage or destroy them during a future conflict. Britain deployed a frigate, a tanker, helicopters, and aircraft to track the Russian submarines, the Ministry of Defense said. The British ships also deployed sonar buoys to track the submarines over thousands of miles. The submarines eventually left the area and headed back toward Russia, Mr. Healey said. These masked men in San Francisco want one thing: your signature. California's ballot initiative wars are so lucrative that signature gatherers are offering cash and pizza for names on a petition. The exchange is illegal, and state officials say they are investigating. By Heather Knight. When people make deals on the sidewalks in San Francisco's Tenderloin neighborhood, they often sell drugs for cash. But this spring, some engaged in a different trade, offering cash for signatures to help initiatives qualify for the ballot. On one afternoon this month, 3 men in ski masks set up a folding table in a part of San Francisco known for homelessness and addiction and handed out $5 bills and pizza slices in exchange for signatures. Up and down one block of Leavenworth Street, people in tattered clothes sat on the sidewalk. Some smoked drugs, others nod off. Some who gathered to sign petitions clutched drug paraphernalia in one hand and a pen in the other. In a California ballot initiative season flush with cash, paid petitioners can make as much as $15 per signature. Prices are sky high, largely because a proposed billionaires tax has spurred countermeasures funded by billionaires, and various campaigns have entered a veritable bidding war for John Hancocks across the state. While petitioners can legally earn money for convincing California voters to sign, it is illegal to pay signatories. And elections officials are supposed to reject signatures that are forged or don't belong to a registered voter. Evan Underwood walked up Leavenworth after signing a petition at the table. Mr. Underwood, who said he is homeless, explained in an interview that he had signed the petition for the cash and food. He said the men had told him what the measure was for, but he had already forgotten. Mr. Underwood, 32, is registered to vote in San Francisco, according to voter records. The signature gatherers had clipboards in a crate with petitions for a measure that would require government audits of proposed taxes and could block the billionaire's tax. Building a Better California, a group backing the measure, has received at least $45 million from the Google co-founders Sergey Brin and several $1 million each from the venture capitalists John Doerr and Michael Moritz, among others. Molly Whedon, a spokeswoman for the audit measure, said the campaign has been working with law enforcement officials. Our campaign has a strict zero-tolerance policy against any form of fraudulent activity, she said. Kurt Onetto, a lawyer working on measures backed by Building a Better California, said the group is using a signature-gathering firm, which in turn hires subcontractors. Those smaller companies seek signature gatherers on websites like Craigslist. Mr. Onetto said the portion of signature gatherers engaged in fraud is exceedingly small, and that the bad signatures would be tossed by the firm and elections officials. But gatherers are paid $15 per signature when they turn in their petitions, regardless of whether the signatures are ultimately validated. In March, a video of different signature gatherers in San Francisco went viral. They appeared to be asking a line of people to sign names that were not their own in exchange for cash. The activity has invited further criticism of California's electoral process from Republicans, who accuse the state of allowing fraud to occur. The Office of California's top elections official, Secretary of State Shirley Weber, said it is working with law enforcement to investigate such petition fraud. Spokesmen with the police department and district attorney's office in San Francisco said they could not comment on current investigations. Omar Ward, who posts social media videos of the Tenderloin under the alias J.J. Smith, posted the March video and others like it. He said he had seen fraudulent signature gathering at least 10 times in the city in the past several weeks. Pablo Gonzalez said in an interview that he had signed a petition in March for cash, putting a name assigned to him by the signature gatherers instead of his own. He said he had no idea what the measure was about. "I was just there for the $5, he said. Other videos have shown similar activity in Los Angeles' Skid Row, and similar fraud has been reported in past California election cycles, sometimes resulting in convictions. Lawrence Smith, a handyman and longtime Tenderloin resident, said he was walking along Leavenworth Street recently when a man asked him to sign somebody else's name on a petition for cash. President Trump has frequently criticized California's elections as fraudulent, and Mr. Smith said he worried the actions of some of these people would only reinforce that rhetoric. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the Friday, April 10th issue of the New York Times. Your reader has been Chris Wilhelm. Thank you for listening.